Everybody, welcome to the final Chesapeake Subcommittee meeting of the 2024 session. Mr. Clerk, if we can open the roll for attendance. All right, clerk, close the roll. We have a quorum. All right, today we've got 3 bills up, all of which are patroned by our good Senator Stewart. We will start with Senate Bill 337. Welcome, Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Krizik.
if I could, with the Senator's indulgence, address the committee.
Delegate Krizik.
I just want to let the committee know that I'm very concerned about about an anonymous handout that was going around right before this committee that attacks the Senator's bill. It does not have any attribution, and really, in my 9 years here, I have never seen this before. Certainly a violation of an unwritten code that we have here in the General Assembly, and I know we have a lot of new members, and I want them to know that when you get something from a lobbyist that is a registered lobbyist and they do not put their name or organization or anything on it, I would just throw it away. For that reason alone, you should vote for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Delegate Krizik. And I just want to reiterate what an important point that is that we only operate well when there's that transparency. And so everybody certainly has the ability to weigh in one way or the other on a piece of legislation, and we very much value that input. But we don't tolerate, I guess, anonymous letters or points. If you can't put your name behind that, you probably ought to find a different line of work. All right, so Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, I guess the first thing I would direct to y'all's attention is the Constitution of Virginia. And in Article 11, Section 1, to paraphrase that, it essentially says that the natural resources of this state are for the benefit of her citizens, for their enjoyment or use. And the situation we find ourselves in is there's a community in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County that is being forced to get off of groundwater and to hook up to Fairfax city water at pretty significant cost. I believe that there are 116 homes in that community. I think it's going to be something between $40,000 and $60,000 to hook up. And yet, there is a golf course next door, and I don't mean to disparage the golf course, but it's just not fair. They are able to continue using that for irrigation and other purposes while this neighborhood has to get off of the aquifer. And so what this bill simply says is they don't have to get off of the aquifer until that use next door has stopped for at least 5 years, and then the aquifer can be reevaluated to determine whether or not we need to take necessary steps. And so I remind you of what the Constitution of Virginia says. Water is reserved for the benefit of the citizens. And I think 116 homes who have been there, I think it's one of the first communities developed in Fairfax, quite frankly. And I understand DEQ's position. They feel like they have to take this position, but essentially this bill would preserve the status quo until other things happen and we can reevaluate that aquifer. And Mr. Chairman, this just illustrates a bigger problem that we have. I was elected 16 years ago and was on the Water Commission, other things, and we started studying this, and at that point we realized we had serious saltwater infiltration in the lower part of the Potomac Aquifer in Hampton Roads area, so they have to use desalination techniques for drinking water. We're having the same thing happening over towards the eastern shore and coming around on up the Northern Neck. Where I live in the upper Northern Neck, DEQ has told King George County that we're going to have to get off of the aquifer and try to find a solution for surface water for drinking. So it's a really serious issue for those of us in the Eastern Virginia groundwater management area, which is essentially east of 95. But I think we need this bill in order to help maintain the status quo and largely to make everybody have a much bigger discussion about this issue and try to figure out how we're going to handle this going forward, because it's a serious issue, and we are the representatives of the folks who sent us here, and the last thing we want to happen is for them not to be able to get drinking water. We've always had plenty of it, and that's not true anymore. We're getting ready to face some pretty significant challenges. So that's my bill, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Senator Stewart. And Senator Stewart, just one correction. It's not Fairfax water, it's Fairfax County water, because if it was Fairfax City water, that's delicious, and they'd be clamoring for that. So.
I just don't think they want to pay for it, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Does any member of the subcommittee have any questions of Senator Stewart? All right, and so just to make sure that everybody understands in terms of what the bill does, and so I think you've got 3 permittees, correct? One of which is a community association, two of which are for non-potable use, correct? And I think that the permit for the community association expires, I forget exactly when, soon. But the idea is to not have theirs expire until the other 2 potentially would expire, to see if the groundwater table rebounded enough for them to be able to keep their permit.
Correct, to reevaluate it and see what we need to do. I've got an expert witness here, Mr. Chairman, and he knows more about that than I do. So I would defer to Mr. Searle if the chairman would allow.
Very good. And I think Senator Stewart, I think most importantly is, and maybe DEQ can nod, is that ultimately, if the water table does not rebound and there's still a problem, they would still have an obligation under the law to revoke that permit, correct?
That is certainly, yes, that could end up being the case. But again, Mr. Chairman, under the Constitution, this is reserved for the benefit of the citizens. We think the citizens should get the benefit of it versus the other uses that, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think you can water a golf course with surface water. I mean, I think you can use a pond to do that. I don't think we have to have the water from the aquifer to do that. So it just seems to me we need to manage this resource a little better.
All right, thank you. Delegate Bloxham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Does DEQ not have the authority now to adjust permits in midstream?
Mr. Chairman, as I understand the law, no. And so I carried a series of bills this year, and some of which will make it through and some of them won't. But if I understand the rules correctly from DEQ, once a permit is authorized, that permit lasts for 15 to 20 years, and that's it. And they don't reevaluate it, they don't relook at it. It just, that is an authorized use. And so if someone comes behind that and needs it for another use, and there's not enough, you're kind of stuck. And so that highlights another problem that we're facing, and actually have a bill which would allow them to use other information, qualitative and quantitative, in doing this permitting process, because I think once they have the permit, they've got the permit.
All right, thank you. Other members of the subcommittee have any questions? All right, any member of the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure, come on up.
Chairman Bova, members of the committee, my name's Robert Suravel. I'm the president of the Talksmont Community Association, Homeowners Association. We are 114 homes plus a nursery school. I graduated from that nursery school in 1949. In any event, we have had our wells, 3 wells, into the Potomac Aquifer since approximately 1941-ish until about 1947. Our first part of the community was built right before World War II. The second part was built after World War II, between 40 and 47. Our wells have been serving our community out of the aquifer for 83 years. The present permit by the DEQ, which came into existence incidentally long after our use of the aquifer, around 1985, 1987. At the time that our community was built, there was no water source other than the aquifer existing under our land. There was no Fairfax County Water Authority. It was invented sometime in the mid to late 50s. In any event, we've been using this wonderful water for 82, 83 years. Excuse me. This Senate Bill 337 of Senator Stewart, which incidentally passed the Senate 39 in favor with one abstention. And what it does is it extends our permit, which expires on April 5, 2027. It extends it 5 years beyond the termination of any non-human users, of which within our range there are two. One is the Bellhaven Country Club for its golf course, and the other is the estate of Mount Vernon, which primarily uses its water for irrigating its lawns and so forth, both of which are have Fairfax County Water Authority available to them as well. But because of our circumstance, it's enormously expensive to hook up each one of our homes to the Fairfax County Water Authority. It's on the order of $5,800,000 for 15 users, which translates to about $50,000 a home. It's an enormously expensive proposition. Just to give you an idea of our demographics, I live on a street that I grew up on with 20 houses on it, 7 of which have retirees in them. We are not a typical Fairfax County community in that we're, 80 years old, and most of the houses are, in fact, 80 years old. In any event, for that reason, incidentally, we have collected reserves to maintain our water system, which is nonprofit and it's operated by volunteers. We have reserves to maintain it, not to replace it. The replacement is enormously expensive, as I've indicated, for all of which reasons we're in favor of Senator Stewart's bill. Any questions?
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions of
I do, Mr.
Mr. Saravel? Delegate Krizik.
Thank you. Is it true that your community is very good at conserving the water and not using it for pools and for your lawns and things like that?
Indeed. We don't have any pools. Actually, we have 2 pools, but they're obliged to truck water in. And we have a limit of 10,700,000 gallons a year that we're permitted to draw, and we draw something on the order of 7 million. Just to put that in context, our nearest sewage treatment plant, the Noman Coal plant into which our sewage goes, disposes of 46 million gallons a day. Our use is nowhere near that in any event. Any other questions?
Delegate Herring.
I just want to clarify, you said it would cost each home, you just say 50,000 to connect?
50,000. Okay. Well, I mean, it would cost for our community to convert to the Fairfax Water Authority. Fairfax Water Authority wants all kinds of bells and whistles. None of our units are metered. There'd be hookup fees, and the Dewberry report, which I received last week, says $5,800,000 roughly for that. If you divide that by the number of units that we serve, it's roughly $50,000 a house.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, Mount Vernon was built first. When was the golf course built versus your subdivision?
I can't answer that with certainty, but I can tell you that the Bellhaven community that's on the other side of Fort Hunt Road from the golf course is around 1935-ish. They've had additions to it, but the golf course itself, I would say, has probably been there at least since the 30s.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the measure? All right, seeing none, is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition to the measure? All right, welcome.
He's not, all right.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, Rob Bohannon representing the Virginia Golf Course Superintendents Association. Just want to make a couple of clarifying points here. One thing, our golf courses are obviously two of the ones in question here. They're under the impression that DEQ can modify their permits. They report quarterly to DEQ their withdrawals. I think part of the issue is they're allotted for this much and they're using this much, so there's never been any issues expressed to them about their withdrawals being too high or anything. One of the things I want to point out, one of the golf courses in question, Mount Vernon Country Club, I asked them what their withdrawal was last year. They said 0. It was a backup well. They didn't use it last year. So this assumption that the golf courses are sucking the water from this neighborhood, I don't think is quite accurate. This aquifer goes from North Carolina to New Jersey. It's a very large aquifer. And there's no doubt that Toxamon is having their challenges, but putting the blame on the golf courses specifically, I think is a little bit inappropriate. Also, one of the things that golf courses have, as somebody said, that they could use other water to irrigate, that is totally true. Just as an example, last year, Bellhaven used just over 9 million gallons. I think they're allotted for like 20-some million gallons per year, but they used a fraction of that. They also, like 10 years ago, they were using like 30 million. So they've drastically reduced the amount that they're using every year. They've built irrigation ponds. They've done central pumping stations. Like any good conservationist, they've worked within the system to try to reduce their reliance on the groundwater. They still use some, but they've greatly reduced the amount they've used over the last decade, 20 years or so. So I want to make that point to the committee that is important to understand. So the other thing is, we feel that legislation like this is just going to encourage everyone to come here when there's a single issue and carve out one specific thing and to the detriment of others. We've got a DEQ. They issue the permits. There's a process. They look at all these different uses in this. We believe DEQ should be able to do their job in the permitting process. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak in opposition? All right, back to the committee. Does any member have any questions of either Senator Stewart, or I also know that we got DEQ in the audience. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my question. Is DEQ present that could kind of weigh in on the issue, kind of give us the...
Looks like they might have escaped out of the room.
He came in.
I think they're going to be here for my other one.
Are they? Okay. Delegate Wilt, did you have a question other than for?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
He wants to see if he's in the hall.
Okay. Let's go at ease for 1 second. Unless
I move to report SB 337.
all right, it's been properly moved. Is there a second? All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we report Senate Bill 337. Clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill reports 8-2. All right, Senator Stewart, we've got Senate Bill 581.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, this bill is permissive, but it allows DEQ to use both quantitative and qualitative data in making their decisions on authorizing permits. And so because King George County recently was told that they're going to have to get off of the aquifer and find a way to get surface water out of the river to drink, I started looking into this, and when I spoke with the director of DEQ, Mr. Rollband, I learned that they don't do this. And because I asked him, I said, do you know how big the pie is? And they said, no, because we don't do that sort of analysis to determine how big the pie is. We authorize people to withdraw water, and those permits are good for 15 or 20 years, and if a use comes in behind them, you're just kind of out of luck. And so, I'll give you a great example. King George, we're going to have to go to the Rappahannock River for water. Caroline County just went to the Rappahannock River for water, and they're going to run water all the way to Carmel Church, which is all the way over to 95. Now, I have a lot of constituents on the lower Rappahannock River that use water for irrigating their crops. And as you suck that fresh water out of the top of the river, it draws the salty water in from the bay, and it changes the salinity of the river as it comes up the river, and my farming constituents can no longer use that water to irrigate their crops. And so that's a concern of mine, and it should be a concern of everyone's. They're not infinite supplies of water, surface water. When you take water out of one point, you're sucking that bay water up the river. My understanding is, in talking with some folks in Northern Virginia, you get water out of the Occoquan. They actually had to backfill that water this year because things were getting so low, and they weren't sure they were going to be able to provide it to everyone. So what I'm asking DEQ to do, and again, it's permissive, it doesn't require them to do it, but I hope that they will, if we ask them to, is to make a determination, make these quantitative and qualitative, use this information in authorizing these permits, and that's what this bill does. And again, this is a series of like 5 or 6 that I filed. There's a joint resolution that's going through too that asks them to update the 1992 Groundwater Act, because we've not done anything with that since 1992. And our situation has really changed dramatically over the last 35 years.
All right, thank you, Senator Stewart. Does anybody on the committee have questions for the senator?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Weber.
Senator, so exactly, I'm trying to wrap my brain about what DEQ currently does. Maybe this would be a question for DEQ, but what they do and then what your bill asks them to do.
Mr. Chairman, my bill asks them to use information about the quantitative and qualitative characteristics of the water. My goal is that they will take a holistic picture of it. That's kind of what I'm hoping for when they're doing these permits. We are about to have to make very tough decisions in the allocation of water.
Delegate Weber,
Trying to give them information.
Director Rollband is back. Did you want to direct your question to him?
Maybe.
Okay. All right. Delegate Weber.
Although Senator Stewart seems to be pretty knowledgeable of his bill, which is better than I could say when I carry legislation. Yeah. So, question for you. In regards to what the senator wants to accomplish, what more and what added data do you have to collect in order to be able to do what the senator would like in his legislation?
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman.
Director Rollband, yes, nice to see you.
My name is Mike Rollband. Our staff believes that we already have the power to do this, and that we do. So we're not opposed to this bill. It just clarifies potentially, what we should do. But we think we're doing it already. And so typically for surface water withdrawal, for example, in the Rappahannock, there'll be an in-depth study. We typically contract someone out to VIMS for surface water withdrawal to look at the salinity and also look at other effects, for example, on types of fish. We think we're doing it. This just emphasizes it, I guess.
Delegate Weber? Nope, you're good. All right, any other members of the committee have questions? Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also to Director Rolband, it seems like there's some, I don't know if disconnect is the right word, but the fiscal impact statement says that incorporating this data would cost about $100,000 per permit. That's a lot more money if we're already doing this in permits. Can you?
When we are doing these water withdrawals, we are spending that range, 50 to 100, depending on the type of permit. Sometimes there's a couple at the same time, so it's a little cheaper. But we're contracting out to VIMS those types of studies right now.
So then follow up.
Delegate Ware.
Who pays for that?
We often pay for it, or we try to get the applicant to pay for it. So it's a little of both. Part of it is if the staff believes that they already have sufficient information, they don't go and require the study. So that's why they think they have the power, but we're not doing it. We're making judgment calls based on their experience in other permits in that same area as to whether or not we're going to do it all the time.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Delegate Lawfer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of had something similar to this. I guess I don't understand it. I love this idea because I think it's really important to be monitoring how much groundwater, surface water we're using. But I don't exactly, and if we're already charging whoever needs the permit, I'm just wondering the purpose of the bill.
Well, the people have to voluntarily pay for it. So if they don't volunteer and we feel that it still needs to be done, then we have to find a source of funding to do that.
Delegate Lawfer.
Okay, so this bill would allow for you to then recoup the money from the general fund?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, Delegate Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you're going to conduct a study, now is a lot of this based on the size of the permittee? And will this then require, regardless of that size of permittee, to undergo some of the same study?
Right, and that's where the judgment's used right now. So say it's a 20,000 gallon per day withdrawal versus a 2 million gallon per day withdrawal. We're not going to do a detailed study for the 20,000. So that's where the staff uses their judgment as to, is it necessary to do an in-depth study looking at all these resources?
Further questions?
And it's relative to the water source. So, if you're at an aquifer for groundwater that's very close to depletion, then you'd obviously do a much more detailed study. Or if it's in a tidal body of water, except for saltwater intrusion, there's no way you're going to lose the water. There's enough water. Question then is saltwater intrusion. It's a less detailed study if you're not going to be causing a quantity problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Delegate Lawfer.
Just a follow-up question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is any of this geared towards commercial production of water, like bottling water from a spring, or is this something that we're concerned about?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that most commercial, like bottling spring water, is typically going to cause a big problem. It could. It depends on the size of the spring. But I think this is more looking at large water withdrawals. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that's all our discussion has been about multi-million gallons per day water withdrawals.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there any member of the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the piece of legislation? And then I know we've got two people online that will speak as well.
Mr. Chairman, Jay Ford with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We support this legislation for many of the reasons Senator Stewart already mentioned. In addition to that, I do like to highlight the fact that in the face of climate impacts, our groundwater usage will be under even additional stressors with shifting rain patterns. Our system is just working differently than when we adopted laws back in 1992. We appreciate the amazing work the folks at DEQ are doing and that they have taken it upon themselves to look at some of this data without express direction to do so. But as a rule of thumb, it's always better to go ahead and get that in code. So we'd urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Nathan Thompson with the James River Association. Given the clarifying and permissive nature of the bill, we also support. Thank you.
All thank you very much. All right, online, first up, we have Brent Hunsinger. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Brent Hunsinger, Friends of the Rappahannock, we support SB 581. As the Rappahannock begins to see more surface water intake applications, we want to be sure that DEQ has the authority to use a comprehensive set of data when making permitting decisions. It is my understanding that currently, if we are talking about the impacts to fish, eggs, and larvae on an individual permitting basis, they take into account the impacts of that individual intake, not the overall impact from all the different intakes that might be occurring in that stretch of river or that water body. So we feel in that example that that's one example of where we think a comprehensive set of data could be taken into account when making these permit decisions. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And next up, we have Pat Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pat Calvert on behalf of Virginia Conservation Network. Everybody's putting their straws into the groundwater and the river water, and we believe DEQ needs and deserves to have comprehensive groundwater, surface water, aquifer data so that it can make informed permit decisions. We appreciate Senator Stewart bringing this bill forward and hope it'll be your pleasure to pass this bill.
All right, thank you. Is there any member of the audience that is in opposition to the piece of legislation? Okay, seeing none, we come back to the subcommittee. Does any subcommittee member have any comments or final questions? Don't believe we have anybody online against. Mr. Clerk?
That's right.
Okay. All right, the committee operates by motion.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved to report and seconded. Clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill reports 10-0. All right, Senator Stewart, you got one more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, again, I direct your attention to the Constitution of Virginia. Article 11, Section 1, which says that our resources are reserved for the benefit of our citizens, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. What this bill says, and there is an amendment which I hope you all will consider. I'm not on the committee, so I can't offer it, but it would take it back to drinking water from human consumption and food production.
Does council have an amendment to report or a nature of a substitute? Okay. Can I get a motion on the substitute? Seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. All right, the substitute is properly before us. Senator Stewart.
And so, Mr. Chairman, what the bill now does is it directs DEQ to make that the highest priority for drinking water for the citizens of the Commonwealth. And the reason is this. The Potomac Aquifer is like a giant lake of water that runs east of 95 from Northern Virginia down through Hampton Roads, Eastern Shore, and on over. And that aquifer is being withdrawn at a pretty alarming rate. As I said before, we have saltwater infiltration in Hampton Roads. There is one project in Hampton, that SWIFT project, where they're injecting clean sewer water back into the aquifer to try to help, but it is literally the proverbial drop in the bucket from the amount of water that we take out of that aquifer. We've seen the Taxamont neighborhood in Northern Virginia, the difficulties they're having. And so what you see in this aquifer, which stretches a great long way, is you're seeing it shrink, shrink, shrink. Salt water's coming in on the lower end. We just don't have any more water on the upper end. And our uses are going to continue to increase, and there's going to be continued pressure on that. And so I understand everybody's against it, and I get it. And I have been fighting this battle since I got elected 16 years ago. And if we don't get these people together and figure this out now, our constituents are not going to be able to get water out of the ground, and none of us want to be in that situation. This bill will force them to come to the table. They did a JLARC study some time ago, and it essentially put all the burdens on homeowners. You know, it said if you want to water your flowers, you got to dig a shallow well or other things like that. And it really was ridiculous, in my opinion, particularly when you talk about the burdens on, you know, the homeowners when there are so many other large uses. But I think this is a really important thing for us to do, and I think we have the responsibility to do this for the citizens that we represent in this part of the world, because if we don't, it's going to be a big problem, and that problem is coming faster than anyone would like to believe it.
All right, thank you very much, Senator. Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this may be a question for council or the patron. Just on drafting reference to citizens of the Commonwealth, I mean, it designates a status versus people of the Commonwealth, and I didn't know if citizens was used elsewhere in the code.
Council.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure this, Senator Stewart might be able to answer this. Oh, actually, just kidding. Citizens of the Commonwealth is actually used commonly throughout the code.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, in multiple places in the Code of Virginia, water is prioritized for drinking.
No, I have no problems with the policy of the bill. I was just wondering, I'm just making sure that we're consistent because the Constitution says people of the Commonwealth, and I'm just trying to be consistent with the spirit of the bill and trying to designate people's citizenship. So if it's used other places in the code, it's used other places in the code. Thank you.
All right. Other members of the committee have questions for Senator Stewart before we open it up to comments from the public. Okay. Those in favor of the measure, if you can come please approach the podium. All right. I do know that we got two online, so I believe we have Brent Hunsinger.
Yes, sir. Once again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Brent Hunsinger, Friends of the Rappahannock. We do support SB 673. We believe it's important to ensure that drinking water is given priority during any water supply permitting and planning processes. Thank you very much, and we hope you support this bill.
All right, thank you. And up next is Pat Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pat Calvert on behalf of Virginia Conservation Network. Lived without cable, electricity, and all kinds of things, but we all need drinking water. So we appreciate Senator Stewart bringing this bill, and we support it as well.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, do we have members of the audience who wish to speak in opposition to the measure? All right, welcome. And it looks like we've got multiple. So as always, let's hope we don't need a timer. But if everybody can keep your remarks succinct and make sure that you're not repeating points made by previous speakers. But welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Preston Bryant on behalf of the Virginia Water and Waste Authorities Association, which is about 35 or so public service authorities, the Virginia Municipal Drinking Water Association, Fairfax Water, and the Virginia Municipal League. We certainly appreciate and understand, and we've seen today, Senator Stewart's long-time interest, years-long interest in protecting Virginia's water resources. That commitment is quite obvious. The question here is one of conflict. As Senator Stewart noted, there are 4 or 5 other code sections that speak to prioritizing, and that's the word, prioritizing drinking water or human water for human consumption. And in some of those code sections, it'll even say above all other uses, but it doesn't say that at all. Prioritization assumes that there are other reasonable uses of water. And if DEQ finds there are competing uses or user conflicts, well, that's where prioritization kicks in, and DEQ, as a regulator, does its thing. Here also, you'll notice that it introduces new words, preserve and protect. And if you think about preserve means save. And so are you then saving water and then not assuming that there are other reasonable uses for water? I represent public service authorities and municipal drinking water systems, and often these public systems have, as we know, they serve households as well as commercial uses and others. And if we were to prioritize only drinking water or preserve or save for human consumption, how would, as a practical matter, a public utility separate human consumption from other uses? So there's likely a real practical challenge here in implementation. So far, DEQ has, for decades, this has been the policy and the law, decades for prioritization of human consumption. We think DEQ can continue to exercise its authority appropriately.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Vassey, CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association. We'll attribute our comments and be more brief. We participated in the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Advisory Committee report from 2017. So we've got a long history of investing in this issue. We think, quite frankly, you've got a conflict with this and what's existing in code. DEQ has, a few years ago, a new statute directing that they have total autonomy in how they deal with permits. And I'll give you a specific example. Since 2017, two of our largest permittees have reduced their consumption by permit by several million gallons per day. One company in particular, 5.5 million, they've invested in reducing their consumption for this. So the attribution that industry's not done anything is not exactly correct, but I will tell you what is correct. Since 2017, 12 recommendations from the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Advisory Commission, only one's been implemented, and that's the SWIFT project. There are a number of other things that we could do to preserve, and those are things that we think you could take a look at separately from this issue. So for those reasons, we oppose this bill.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ethan Betterton with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Would associate our comments with the previous speaker. The advisory committee does meet, and we believe if there's an issue there with the groundwater, that's the appropriate forum to address these issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Rob Bohannon, representing the Virginia Economic Developers Association. We associate ourselves with the previous comments, but are also concerned about the chilling effect this could have on economic development projects, and think that DEQ has a process in place that's working as it is. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Martha Moore, Virginia Farm Bureau. We were originally okay with the bill with the food production, but now with that being removed, we are opposed to it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You too. They need to be here. I got to stand up. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Shannon Varner with Troutman Pepper. I'm here on behalf of Mission H2O. Mission H2O is a broad-based stakeholder group that works on water supply issues and policy, and appreciate the work that the senator has done on this topic, but unfortunately, for all these reasons that we've heard before, this group opposes as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Rolband.
I had to join you. Good afternoon again. I'll try to be brief. We have three major areas of concerns. The first is human consumption or drinking water, in that most of the permits that we issue are not specific to that. So for example, if you wash your car, you would be violating this human consumption requirement. So you couldn't fill a pool. A lot of water, most water companies provide water to manufacturing facilities. to all sorts of users for cooling, for example. So from a practical standpoint, our permits just simply don't differentiate between these different uses. The second aspect of that is existing, in terms of practicality, is existing water rights. We already are going to have a group this summer, a sub-stakeholders advisory group to talk about grandfathering. It's been a problem since 1989, I understand. Roughly 70% of our water consumption is for grandfathered uses, and that has never been resolved. Can we restrict those uses or not? And then, of course, economic development that was mentioned from a practical standpoint. We try to balance all these different needs, and that would be incredibly difficult to do the way this is written. The last I'll point out is that in 2018, there was a study, obviously before my time. It was for House Bill 1186, and the conclusion of this work group was that it's not necessary or desirable to make these types of changes. So we could recreate the wheel and do another study, but it's already been studied to death. And I think the first thing that we have to do is look at these grandfathered uses, try to resolve that long outstanding problem for 70% of our water consumption, and then apply what we're doing right now. So far it's working. It's not perfect, but luckily a lot of major users have been reducing the water needs. You might recall like the King William Reservoir. Why did that die in the end? It died because the consumption in Newport News dropped. It didn't grow. So there's a lot of water conservation practice occurring, and I'd rather focus on that and focus on our permit renewals using the current system versus being forced into something that's not practical and we're not able to implement.
Right.
Thank you.
Director Robley. I did have a question, then I see we got some other questions in the queue. So I wanted to focus in a little bit on the preservation aspect, which I appreciate, right? You protect and preserve. But I also am trying to figure out what the practical ramifications of how you would implement that in a permit, because I do understand that if you've got somebody coming in and they want an industrial permit or a manufacturing permit for the water, how do you figure out what you're preserving and how long that would need to be preserved for, and indeed would it keep you from being able to issue a permit for that use because you would have to anticipate that there would be some kind of human use in the future?
That's one of the conundrums that we face with this bill, because how long do you want to preserve the water? How much do you want to preserve the water? We'd have to start changing the water laws in Virginia to be allocating uses of water to different people, when I say people, different entities, different users. And we can't do that right away, number one, but number two, it's a change of 400 years of practice of water law in this area.
Right. Delegate Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it was mentioned you have a couple existing statutes where you do have to prioritize already water for human consumption. I'm wondering if you might give us an example just to show us how you do your analysis under the status quo where that human consumption may take a backseat to something else as far as a permit goes, like how you do that was an example of something that might take precedence.
So right now, we've been blessed that we haven't had a problem where we have to make that hard choice. So the key has always been to do an analysis to see how much water is available, how much is proposed to be withdrawn, and it's not just from this particular permit, it's the whole watershed. So, so there are existing uses already, and then project that there's not going to be for groundwater, that the aquifer will not go below 20% reserve, so we have a safety factor. And then for surface water, we have low flow conditions for biological reason, there's criteria. The best, of course, in the Potomac, and when I say the best, the most complicated, is the Potomac, because we have an interagency agreement, with Maryland, District of Columbia as well. So we're doing our darndest, and we're required to make sure that we preserve both the biological conditions and low flow periods with the public uses.
Just to follow up, Mr.
Delegate Hernandez.
Chair, keeping that response in mind, so do you feel as we're gathered here today that you need any additional tools in the law, or do you feel that the tools are up to the task of managing water in the Commonwealth?
I think the tools are up to task. I think the first step, though, is we need to refocus on the grandfathering problem, because 70% of the water withdrawal is by grandfathered users. And I approved a letter that went out that irritated a lot of people earlier this year, asking discussing how much water they're withdrawing, and a lot of permittees believe they have the rights to this 1989 agreement to use a lot more water than currently their permits allow. So I think the first step is resolving that issue. How much are people allowed to use that are currently permitted and grandfathered? And then we can get a better handle on modeling and seeing how much water is necessary. Right now, we haven't had a big problem, but the problem is really not spoken about. It's this grandfathering problem.
All right. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none. Senator, you want the last word?
I do. And Mr. Chairman, it was one thing I found very interesting that Mike said as he was discussing this. He said, we've got to change the laws around groundwater and how we allocate these permits. And he made that statement to you all, but we can't do it right now. And that has been the mentality since I was elected 16 years ago. And we continue to go down this road. And all those folks who came up and spoke against this bill today illustrates why we can't change it, because there are so many competing interests. But if we don't do something, all those people who spoke against that bill are not going to be able to get water for their uses. I brought this bill to force everybody to come to the table so we can try to get something done. You're not going to be able to irrigate your crops. You're not going to be able to have water for industrial uses. You're not going to have water for the golf course. You're not going to have water for homes to wash your car unless we do this and act now, because that aquifer we're depleting it at an alarming rate. We got to do something about it. It's just that simple.
All right. Thank you, Senator Stewart. All right, back to the committee. Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to mention something in this regard that it's been a concern of mine since I've come on, which was 1998. We've been hearing some of these things, and I've had the experience of serving on the State Water Commission off and on since I've been on that time. And the purpose of that, quote, is to study all aspects of water supply and allocation problems in the Commonwealth. And that's been what that commission has looked at. And I know our chairman's been a member of that, and other members up and down this committee dais have been. We've just spent, 20 minutes talking about one bill. Water Commission spends meetings on a regular basis. And one of the challenges and frustrations I've felt in that is that we may not have come to this summative conversation adequately. It seems to me that is the perfect forum for this kind of thing, and the kind of thing that ought to be considered on a comprehensive as opposed to an ad hoc or legislative basis, because this is a big matter, as you have very rightly said, and has been acknowledged by several of the folks who've spoken both for and against this legislation. I do think it's a critically important thing. I don't know that this is the vehicle to get us there, but I do think it's something we have got to look at, just as you said, in a way that takes a new look at the global picture of water consumption in Virginia, particularly in the Eastern Virginia aquifer.
All right, thank you, Delegate Ware. All right, committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Wilt.
I have a motion.
Delegate Wilt.
And I'll preface it by agreeing with Delegate Ware's comments and much of what the patrons pointed out. But that being said, would it be appropriate to gently table the bill, but with a letter from the chair directing forgive me, the name? Yeah, directing them to take more decisive action?
I guess, Delegate Wilt, what I would say is it would certainly be appropriate to send a letter to the State Water Commission, and serendipitously enough, the chair of the State Water Commission is Senator Suravel.
Mr. Chairman, if you want to kill the bill, kill the bill. I'm a big boy. I've been down here before. But this discussion recurs in the Water Commission every year, and we have not taken any steps to do anything about it because of the competing interest. Look, I understand how this goes. If you want to kill the bill, kill the bill. But it is worthless to go back before the Water Commission again because we have beaten this horse to death ever since I got elected in the Water Commission, and nothing's going to come of it out of the Water Commission, I can assure you.
All right, thank you. All right.
Thank you anyway, though.
Delegate Wilt, do you have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we gently lay the bill on the table.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. That's non-debatable. Clerk, open the roll. All right, clerk, close the roll. That bill is gently laid on the table, 8-2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Senator Stewart, I do want to thank you very much for continuing to work on this issue, and I appreciate and admire your passion for it.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Clerk, do we have anything else on our agenda?
That's it.
All right, seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn? All right, we got to get a motion to adjourn if you all want to go. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, committee.